Welcome back to the second week of my 30-day Houdini challenge. Once a day for the next month, I will be taking one randomly generated word to use as a prompt for a new Houdini scene built from scratch. The goal of this project is to get back in the swing of things and start exploring new and interesting ways of doing things using Houdini. This video represents the halfway point of the challenge, covering days 8 through 15. I can't believe I've made it this far. Some things have worked, some things have not. Each day has been a new discovery and a test of my personal creativity, so let's take a look at what I've been doing this past week. Day 8. Van. In some ways, the 60s will never die. This one was fairly simple to set up. I selected the correct proportions of the model and separated them out into class groups using the connectivity node. I then created a peak geometry to use for the vellum layer with pins around all the edges. A pyro spread was then used to drive the tearing along the path of spread. The idea was to peel the paint off little by little, revealing the surface underneath. At the moment, everything kind of falls off a little too fast and too large a chunk, so I'll have to go back and refine it when I get the chance. By and large, I'm happy with how this turned out. It works and I have a good understanding of how things need to be done. Day 9. Establish. Look upon my work, ye mighty, and despair. My first try was simply using vellum grain as is, but that didn't look very good, so I rebuilt it along a different path. Using attribute transfers, I selected the area in which the statue interacts with the terrain. I then created a pool of vellum grain exclusively involved in the animation, which I then used to drive the sand as the statue rises out of the desert. It's still not quite where I would like it to be, but it is getting closer. Day 10. Tropical. Does anyone know where the rum's gone? Another round of procedural modeling. This time I managed to complete the entire tutorial in one sitting. This was fascinating to put together, and it looks very good for what little there is to it. There were a number of things I had to alter and figure out on my own because the tutorial I was following kept using nodes that had been demoted across the updates. Probably the biggest lesson I learned through all this was how to reactivate nodes using the text port and OP unhide. When I get the chance, I plan on working on this a bit more to make it a bit more mine. But for now, that is one good looking palm tree. Day 11. Ghost. Has anyone seen my big red circle? Finally something I knew how to do ahead of time. This was made by creating an offset mesh via a peak node and VDB from polygons. A normal directed point scatter was then used to create only the upper surfaces. From there, a pyro smoke simulation was made using a strong pop wind and the original mesh as a collision source. All that remains is putting a nice visualization and material over the top of it. This is an effect that I have experimented with in the past, and I'm actually really happy with how it turned out. I will need to come back and adjust the animation looping and other visual elements, but for the most part I'm satisfied with how it looks right now. I might even try doing up a tutorial for it at some point if people are interested. Day 12. Path. Nothing cooler than a good abstract piece. All this one involves is selecting a starting point, then using the points by range node to select every second point to be the end points. From there it is a matter of applying a find shortest path to create all the connections and then tossing on a carve node to complete the look. Remarkably simple for such an intriguing effect. What I want to do further down the line is come back and add a bit more flair to proceedings. I'd really like to see how it looks with sparks travelling out along the wires as they take shape. Day 13. Digital. Step into the mainframe. This effect was inspired by a scene in the original Tron movie. What I did was break the mesh into cubes using a default points from volume in order to Voronoi fracture along straight lines. I then used a bounding box to isolate each section line by line and apply an upwards facing velocity to have them peel off row by row. I also added an offset exploded view to the active layer to make it bulge up before the blocks fly away. From there I applied billowy smoke to each piece and had it collide with the remaining mesh. I still have a ways to go before it matches the original design, and I want to go back and add some lightning or something to the start of the animation, but it is as good a place to start as anything. Day 14. Kid. Doesn't it just warm your heart? I think it's obvious which movie inspired this one. Day 14's word kind of threw me for a loop. It's one of those words that you need to tread carefully around when making content. So obviously I ran with the first thing that popped into my head, and by the time I paused to ask myself if this was truly a good idea, I was already too committed to the bit. So presenting the fabulous chest-bursting childbirth. This one was made by extracting a section of poor Tommy's torso and converting it into fractured chunks with vellum constraints holding everything in place. I then animated a simple sphere to push against the skin from behind until finally working up enough speed to break on through to the other side. The next step was to turn the connecting constraints into vellum hair to give a bit more substance to the scene. Each string is set to break the further it is pulled from its brethren. I then added my animated character as a collider and let the meat fall where it lay. Everything does look a bit shoddy right now, and there's plenty that I'll need to fix. I will definitely need to come back and make it so the tears are not so obvious before the action starts, as well as coming back to add further details such as blood and clothing, but it works and it made me chuckle, so success. Day 15. Willpower. The journey of 1,000 steps begins with one flat tire. This one I didn't get quite as far as I would have liked. I had hoped to get the truck to be dragged along atop actual rolling wheels. Instead I spent all my time working out how to get the chains functioning. The first thing I did upon setting up my scene was to use the draw curve tool to position my chains, then turn a modified torus into chain links to transform with the chain node. My initial approach was to try and use rigid body simulation to process the completed chains and animate them out behind Crag, but things didn't work out quite as planned. The chains either kept clipping through him or breaking apart as soon as they moved. After getting some advice, I ended up redoing things using vellum. By processing the curves themselves as vellum hair, I was able to attach the endpoints to both the truck and Crag in order to have them interact with each other. And then rather than trying to produce collision data for each individual link, I passed the vellum curves to the chain node, and suddenly it worked like a dream. It's amazing how well things can work if you do them in the proper order. There's still some issues like it falling through his hands and shoulders and the truck not moving, but I can deal with them later. And that's it for the second week of my 30-day challenge. I'm halfway done and not looking to be running out of steam anytime soon. Stick around as I upload more results day by day, followed by these weekly recaps where I break down my methods. The channel has just reached 250 subscribers in the past couple of days, and I couldn't be happier. Thanks for watching. I can't wait to show you what else I have ready for you next time. See you around.